street protests, running battles, bloody confrontations, countless arrests and condemnation from the international community are some of the historical moments that gripped Kenya in the 90s as civil societies, a section of the clergy, opposition members of parliament, and a section of youth, especially from major universities, led protests against the government, agitating for comprehensive constitutional reforms. Among the civil societies was the National Convention Assembly, an umbrella of various organizations whose executive wing was the National Convention Executive Council, the NCEC. Professor Kivutha Kibwana, the current Makueni governor, was NCE spokesman and reveals that initially they were supported by organizations which were offshoots of international bodies, for instance, the International Commission of Jurists, Kenyan chapter, and FIDA.
And part of why some of the initial civil society work was done through those organizations was they enjoyed some protection from the international level, because ICJ is an international body, so a Kenyan chapter was harder to be cracked for the national government to crack upon it.
Civil societies continued pushing for political and civil rights and were led by, among others, Kenya Human Rights, Center for Law and Research International, and League of Women Voters, which were agitating for reforms. David Alamba was a co-convener of the NCEC.
Initially, they tried to do the theoretical work that was required as a basis for constitutional change and for also educating the citizenry. And there was a lot of sensitization, like people would meet in conferences. And I remember then the state would say that these are elite people who are being given money by Wazungu, and they want to destabilize the country. And this money should be used in proper development, because the truth was, of course, the international community was funding these NGOs by and large.
From 93 till about 95, there were many attempts between the civil society organizations and the politicians in opposition at that time to unify, to create a mechanism and a process in how to start the struggle for Katiba Mpya.
The NGOs were quite robust. They had a mission. They felt that the country had to change, and there was a lot of volunteer work. We came to a situation where there was also initially a parallel attack on one partyism from the religious sector. And that is when the Ndingis, the Muges, the Njoyas, Kuria, Gitari, Okulu, Bishop Okulu, when also the faith sector, they realized that the worshippers were in a bad state. There was hardly any economy, there were hardly any civil rights, so they had to speak.
My own story about activism goes back to my days at the University of Nairobi, standing up for freedom of expression and academic freedom at the time. In 1969, I was suspended along with Apollo Njonjo and Wori Wakataka and others for a peaceful assembly that we had convened in Kamakunji, because the university administration, the principal, denied us to have Jaramogi to come and speak to the students at Taifa Hall on the role of free and fair elections in a democratic Kenya.
Cyprian Nyamwamu had just come from the university and joined the reform movement, and later would rise to the leadership of NCEC and the National Convention Assembly.
The NCEC was the house of all the Kenyans who wanted reforms in this country. And there were 5 key sectors that were in NCEC. Not only the civil society, but the religious leadership that was pro-reform. We had a very strong opposition presence because civil society was unable to organize the crowds that politicians in the opposition were able to do. So we had Mwai Kibaki, we had Raila Odinga, we had Wamalwa Kijana, James Orengo, and others. We had a very strong presence from professional associations and the academia. So there were university lecturers like Akina Smokin Wanjala, Professor Kivutha Kibwana, and others.
In '96, the National Convention Planning Committee was formed. This committee, NCPC, was very broad-based. It had the religious sector, the civil society sector, the academic sector, the opposition political sector, and so on. And of course, KANU was always invited to be part of it. Whether they denied or declined invitations, that was another matter.
So when now the 4Cs, when the Clarions, when all those civil society groups come together with the faith and with now the political opposition, this is now when you get National Convention Assembly, whose executive arm was NCEC, which spoke with one voice. Given now what NGOs have done in terms of saying that this is how our constitution should look like. And also when we begin to have, particularly in the 1997, we begin to have demonstrations to say that we now must have a constitution and this is the kind of constitution that will be required. The NCC now was born and it pushed, particularly through the National Convention Assembly and the NCC as its executive arm. And we had the mass action, you know, led by people like Davinda Lampa, Gibson Kamau, Willie Mutunga.
In accordance with the plan laid out by NCE's National Planning Committee, the first National Convention Assembly was held in April 1997 in Limuru, where Professor Kivutha Kibwana was appointed NCEC spokesman. Politicians joined the bandwagon.
The first National Convention Assembly established the agenda for reform. That was the outcome. So that agenda then became the basis for the struggle for people-centered constitutional reform and a new constitution.
The opposition realized that we could do business together. And they therefore also became partners.
We were able to set the agenda and push the agenda across the country through convention assemblies. So we had assemblies everywhere in all the districts. Those days we didn't have the counties. And we even went to the constituencies. We conducted, I remember, 129 constituents convention assemblies.
The leadership of NCA, that is NCC, had made a commitment that if you were a convener or a co-convener in NCC, you will not vie for political office, which helped us to unify the politicians, because politicians get very threatened by any other alternative leadership that comes into being, and particularly as get closer to the election year. But that commitment by us, that none of us would vie for office, actually kept us unified until 1997.
Because of all forces that wanted change coming together, they used to have weekly meetings of the Executive Council and would have periodic National Convention assemblies just to take stock that would have representations from all over the country.
It had a lot of force, and I think initially it had been underestimated. Even some of the religious sector had civil society organizations, doing civic education, particularly doing civic education, because it was easy to do civic education through faith institutions, because the government could not attack those. Because when we did it on our own as civil society, I remember we'd go to places and there would be police. Like once, I think we went to Kamega, and there was police to stop us from doing civic education. And I remember even the police didn't have, they were dispatched quickly and they didn't even have money for lunch. So we stayed there the whole day with them. We had to buy, soda and bread to eat together, and now to do the civic education to the police to tell them why, we are doing these things that, we are doing. I remember Joya leading us into prayer and speaking the things that we were coming to tell the people in prayer, through prayer. And maybe somebody else also intervened to pray. Sometimes we would even try to sing the national anthem so that the police would not beat us up, although they would still beat us up. It was because of the resolve of all these sectors to work together and try to agitate for, first of all, the one-party state to be changed, and then eventually now the constitution.
The major event of 97 in terms of a mass protest was the Sabha Sabha of 97, and this was a countrywide protest to demand reforms, and that was bloody. I think 22 young people were killed, many were injured and maimed.
If I remember Sabha Sabha, 1997, I was in college, and the police descending on us at Uhuru Park and beating my brother Captain Mbati and the Reverend Dr. Timothy Njoya, subconscious. They were left for the dead.
And the police were there, and they weren't doing anything. So they gave the goons a free hand. So that's what used to happen. Yeah, and the goons would meet us each time. We'll go to Kamakunji, walk to any demonstration, and that sort of stuff. And they even invaded the All Saints Cathedral, because many had gone in there to seek refuge, and they were merciless.